Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And my guest today comes all the way from down under in Australia, Maria Esguerra. Did I say it
hmm
correctly? I
You
hope.
did,
I,
yes.
I pray. Maria and I met together in Barcelona at a cult conference, and I learned she's a psychologist. She supervises other psychologists. But for me, what makes her so extraordinary is she was born and raised in one of the most destructive cults I've ever worked in, the Children of God. And I admire her so much. And her dissertation was on social identity theory. I just recently listened to her little mini video on LinkedIn on positive behavior support for folks with disabilities, which was spot on and just awesome. I'm a fan, Maria. So, why don't you introduce yourself to my audience and tell us about your childhood and a little bit of
Mhm.
your journey, please?
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. That means a lot to me. So I have only recently, I suppose, come out in the sense of like in the last 2 years, talking a little bit more about my experiences. So this is very new to me. I can feel the nerves. And just like you were telling me, there was a little bit of shame around being a survivor and someone who grew or who's been in a cultic group sometimes as a mental health professional or psychologist, sometimes you don't get a wonderful, warm welcome when people hear that. Sometimes there's even some discrimination, unfortunately, and stigma. Um, so I've been terrified after going through what I had to go through to get an education. So I've been, scared to talk about my history and story. And I think it's a lot of people who either grow up or even join groups. They're scared that it's going to be seen the wrong way, that there's something wrong with them mentally, and I was terrified I was going to lose my registration. But after
Mm,
so many years of working with other survivors and telling them not to have shame, and even in the family court systems, trying to like support my
sure.
friends not have their ex-partners with narcissists, try to take their kids off them and using their history against them, I thought I need to practice what I preach.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
yes.
you're a role model.
Mm,
You're amazing. So
thank
thank you
you.
for overcoming the jitters. And you just have you've made so many contributions. You've established yourself as the professional that you are. I believe you supervise other psychologists in Australia. You're a teacher. You just have so much to offer. So I really want to stop talking and let you say more about growing up in the Children of God and what that was like for you and
Mhm.
overcoming those things.
Yes, and thank you for paving the way for those of us that were terrified to talk. I think you're speaking without shame and speaking about, you went through this thing and that's just part of you, and now you want to help others. It's very yeah, it gives us so much confidence and courage and awareness. And you've also helped family members of mine, so I'm 100% grateful for
Yeah,
you.
thank you. But I want to just pull back on that for a second and say I feel almost I don't know what the word, but I was only in for 2.5 years and I
Mm,
had my experience at 19 to 22, and
mm,
it's nothing on the order of magnitude of adversity as people like yourself who were born and raised in an authoritarian group. So it was easier for me to be public because I had a good self image. I knew I
mm,
was smart and I couldn't believe that my mind got hacked. So even though people heaped it on me, I was like, screw you. I know who I
mm.
am. So it made it easier.
It's
But
so
for
true.
folks like you to achieve what you've achieved is truly stellar.
Thank
Please
you. And
continue.
it is true. And in the regards of growing up, I think in an authoritarian group and in extremism and in, um, I think it's it's a very different experience rather than joining and then leaving and having a pre-identity and also
Exactly.
support systems in place. And so I was born the seventh child in 9 years. My mom was only in her 20s at the time.
Wow.
And we had at least four different dads. I think five dads to my siblings. So that was the kind of group it was. It was very much. They said it was polygamous, or they called it sharing.
Mm,
um, it was kind of communist on a grand scale of nothing belongs to you. Everyone's working and this for the group, the good of the group. Even your own children aren't yours.
right.
It was just kind of like we share everything, partners, things. You don't have anything that belongs to you, and you just do what you're told. Um, so I think that was kind of how I started my life in the world. A
Right.
lot of us were not even raised by our own parents, or we'd go in and out of relationships with them. At the age of, I can't actually remember when my dad first got sick with cancer, but he had the same cancer I think you had, Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah.
So he was only in his 20s, and I think he was 19 when he joined. And there was a lot of shunning of medical support as well. And we just didn't go to the doctor unless someone was on death's door sometimes, and
Mm.
sometimes not even then. Um, and so he ended up passing away when I was only 4 years old.
Oh,
Um, so it was a heartbreaking thing. Obviously, I was a very young child, but watching this massive lump just basically strangle him to death. Um,
oh,
and
I'm so sorry about your loss. I can say, I just want to say for my audience, this cult was run by a pedophile named Moses David Berg, who claimed to be a prophet of God, who spoke to God, and he just said, you have to, send women out to be happy hookers for Jesus, and you had to share children. Like, he was disgusting. He
mm,
fled the United States because the authorities were coming after him. And he's been, was in hiding until he died. But I'm just wanting to say the prophet piece because there's a news
mm,
story right now about a prophet in Kenya who said it's the last days. We're going in the forest and don't let your children eat or drink. And like
mm.
400
Did
people
you
have died because of the
did you know
prophet.
that was the Children of God shoot
Yeah.
off, and everything that they live by, their Australian cult? It's 100% Children of God, except for maybe the sexual stuff.
Hmm.
But so they were actually missionaries over in Africa, and they incited that. So,
Oh my goodness.
you've talked about the Moonies and all the shoot offs and all of these groups. They are like a mimetic infection,
Yeah.
mental infections, and they just create more and more groups. They don't get shut down. They don't. It's all about religious freedoms, where all these human right violations are happening, and it's absolutely tragic. So absolutely. So in my childhood, there was all of that, every form of abuse, and it was just a constant exploitation of their
Mm.
members. And David Berg, was absolutely a pedophile, but he was very narcissistic, and I think we also forget they're very machiavellistic, like
Mm.
cult leaders. I'd say even more than the narcissism. They're just manipulative. They're cunning. They're just
Machiavellian. Yeah.
Sorry,
It's just,
yeah, they'll
yeah.
actually do anything just to stay in power. um,
Hmm.
and so when my dad wasn't getting better, when the whole group of 10 plus thousand people were praying for him, he was angry. So that was very common that he would rage on people who were sick or people who were hurt or disabled or something, because there was like this perverse doctrine that God was judging you, and almost like every cult is like it's all your fault if anything goes wrong. That's a massive red
Exactly.
flag. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that was.
it looks bad on him as his almighty power if one of
Mm-hmm,
his people gets ill and doesn't get faith healed. So of course
mm-hmm,
he's going to be angry and blame the victims. And my hope is that our stories, and if we can get more former members to share our stories, will become normalized so people can see we're smart, we're talented, we're
Mm,
contributing citizens of our societies, and we have to get past this notion that our minds can't be hacked, because they can, as
mm.
we're seeing around the world in politics today.
And
So,
he was from a very good family, and his dad was a doctor. So can you
mm,
imagine watching your young, that's the same age as my kids now. And I'm like, I cannot imagine watching them refuse to take any medication in a group that was exploiting them, because he made a lot of puppets and he was actually on the television, first time they'd done anything legitimate. So can you just imagine that, watching your child die like that and being exploited and working 16-hour days and not getting any support? He wouldn't even take Panadol. Like that's
mm,
how much he wanted, or that's, I don't think you call it Panadol there, but
pain pill.
painkillers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like and the saddest thing is he was, shunned at the end, and he was basically left to die on his own after giving everything to his spiritual family. So that's how my life started, watching this. And I think we don't talk about medical neglect as much on cults.
We
And
should.
it's a huge thing because, like, yes, there's people that have died and murdered and this and that, but there's also tons of people that are living with lifelong disabilities from,
Yes.
from things, or died of cancer, or yeah, that have major health issues or mental health issues that have not gotten the treatment they needed in these groups. And
Yeah. I'll just
yeah.
add that I met a woman who had these horrible headaches, and
Mm,
she was in Scientology, and they kept doing auditing on her, and she kept asking to see a doctor, and they kept selling more auditing for her. She finally went to the doctor, and she had a tumor. She
mm.
had a tumor in her brain. She could have been cured, and she died.
Horrifying. Yes, I know several of those as well, of
Yeah.
incidents just like that, watching babies die, watching people die because they've had a headache and left in their room for days and prayed over, and spiritual sins and all that jazz. So that started off my life, and then so we didn't have any vaccinations or anything like that. So I had measles, chickenpox, mumps,
Mm,
malaria, every
wow.
imaginable childhood disease, lots of parasites, because we moved to the Philippines when I was only 1 year old. So we lived in a lot of Asian countries because obviously there's a lot less government, I suppose,
Hmm.
like oversight in these countries. And little white blonde kids were making a lot of money selling things and
Right.
singing.
You often slave labor, child labor on the streets to raise money and do puppets and do other kinds
Mhm.
of performances, if I'm correct.
Absolutely. So it was always just about how we could bring in more finances for the group. So a lot of, I mean, we weren't getting schooling, or if we did, it was just like a small amounts of propaganda.
Right.
And we learned how to read and write really well at the beginning, because they want to get you reading, because then you could start reading propaganda.
Right.
And so the first thing they do, like even at 2 years old, a lot of us were reading. That's really young. So they kind of think of themselves as professional early educators, but we missed out
Mo
on.
letters are not
Mm,
educational material. That's what the
for
cult
sure.
leaders, called it.
Absolutely. Yes. And so that led me to a life of, having a lot of pain, and thinking a lot of shame every time I was sick or something, watching my dad die like that. And so I was sent all over lots of Asian countries, wherever they needed someone. It wasn't a thought about, oh, what does she need?
Right.
It was just, and then so I ended up, as a very young person, I think 16, I moved to India, and I ended up, falling pregnant quite young as a teenager, because that's another thing. It was very much against contraceptions. Like wouldn't say absolutely ban, because if you do that, sometimes you get the opposite, but it would be like, are you going to go for the gold, or are you going to trust God completely, or are you
Mm.
going to just go for, not getting a medal or this, and not trusting? So it was always that manipulative sort of.
Whoa.
And then when you're a teenager, as you know, you want to do everything, to sort of go for the gold and to be 100%, having faith. And there's tons of doubts, of course, because there's so
Right.
many inconsistencies, tons of people manipulating and just yeah. So basically, as you kind of see it, but that at the same time, you're like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I have to
Well, that's how
change.
they program it. That's part of the
Totally.
hack. Is and
Yeah.
and it's when you start seeing it happening in other groups out there, you go, wait a minute. It's so obvious it's wrong over there, but what about
Hmm.
my situation? And
Yeah.
starts.
So in our cult, we didn't even have external friendships or relationships. Like we weren't allowed to. If someone left the group, they were gone. They were shunned. They were backsliders, was the terminology.
Yeah,
Um, and uh, and it was actually quite horrible. So sometimes we would pray against them, pray for horrible things to happen to them. Um,
very common.
it's very awful. So
Yeah,
what
very
if it
awful.
was your own lovely family members, it's just really heartbreaking. So
Yeah.
I fell pregnant as a teenager. I was quite young, certainly not ready for a child. And that's another thing. I think it traps you in because then you've
Mm.
got no education. You've just been working like a slave. You've got no money. You've got no family in the outside world, no support systems. And I think
Hmm.
that's the biggest difference with the second generation or multi-generation experience is all of the abusive things are pulling you in.
Right.
All your family and everyone is trying to pull you into the group rather than having someone on the outside like you had with your sister, and people sort of waiting for you,
Yeah.
and a life waiting for you on the outside. So it's incredibly hard to leave. So we were sent to Africa when my son was only a few months old, and he ended up contracting meningitis as
Hmm.
yeah, he was only a few months old. And so we were doing the same thing, praying, putting olive oil on his head and tongues, and there's something wrong with me, God's trying to punish me. Not that he had an infection in his brain that needed to get
Right. Right.
so
So
I'm
you
like
just said tongues. So I just want my listeners, you mean speaking in tongues? Like what?
speaking in tongues, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that sort of chanting
Yeah.
and prophecy, and that was after David Berg died. A lot of people think the harm stopped after David Berg died in '92, I think it was. But his wife, Karen Zerby, I'd say is even more evil than him in some regards.
Hmm.
She made things a lot yeah, there was just a lot of bizarre doctrines that she had as well.
Hmm.
She was incredibly manipulative, and she's still living free on the child trafficking money out in Mexico somewhere, apparently. So I just don't understand how nothing has been done or can be done, and
Yeah. It's a shame no one's tracked her down and held her accountable because that's
I'm
what's
sure
right.
they could if they wanted to. So we definitely have things called Bring the Children of God to Justice and Karen Zerby. So if anyone wants to go and sign that petition for, it's she's a U.S. citizen, and just like Keith Raniere, I mean, even if she is overseas, I don't know why they can't find her and bring her to
Well,
justice.
we're
I
going
think.
to have a blog that goes along with this. So we're going to put a link to that and a link to the ex-member website that if it's still up there, I want to say it's xfamily.org. It was my recollection, but maybe
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
changed over.
that's where you can find a lot of if you want to go down very dark rabbit holes and see some of the
Well, they're
horrific
not rabbit
things.
holes. They're informational holes. If you want to
It's
know
true,
about
actually. Yeah.
this horrible abuse of human rights, but they're not rabbit holes because I deal with
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
conspiracy
yeah.
theories and real
Sorry,
rabbit
wrong term.
holes. This is the
Yes.
real thing. This is
Those are
a
historical documents, and
thank you. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. And like the Davidito book, I think was one of the most
Mm-hmm.
horrific documents probably a cult has ever come up with. And I think
Yep.
other ones were kind of good at hiding their sexual abuse and exploitation of kids, but the Children of God just laid it all out there. They created manuals on how to sexually abuse kids, and so
I'm
awful.
s- I'm so
It's
sorry. So I want to move forward because
mhm.
you had a child with meningitis. How did you become a psychologist? Like fast forward because
Yeah.
there's
So it
so
was
much.
definitely from my experience with my son. So we ended up just getting into the hospital in time, and it was in Africa. So it's actually a medical research center for
Mm.
AIDS. So it was a horrifying place for a young teenager to be in with a baby in a coma. So he was in a coma for 10 days there, and now he's got like a lifelong brain injury from that.
Oh,
And then, of course, when we brought him home, it was like, praise God, God saved him. So, so it sort of kind of snowballed, and then I ended up having another child. Falling pregnant again in Africa. It was just horrible conditions.
mm-hmm.
And so I remember distinctly coming back to Australia, and then I was in the commune. And after I'd given birth to my second son, who was only, a few days old, and the Australian government can give you like a baby bonus at the time. I think it was $700 or something that I sort of was aware of. And of course, they love government. It wasn't like they weren't using the government. They loved government funding in our cult. And most of it was going to a pedophile and a
Right.
child trafficking ring. So
Right.
how the fact that they don't even care about the money, that's usually where they get the cults on.
Mm.
Um, so I kind of knew that that money was coming in, so it was kind of my ticket out. But I just distinctly remember sitting out the front of my house, of the commune that we were at, and looking at my brand new baby and my son with developmental delays. He was only 2 years old, and just kind of flashing back to my childhood and all of the sicknesses I had, all of the loneliness and not ever having love or connection or feeling like anyone was there for me,
Mm.
and my life being sacrificed for that. And I just looked at my boys and I was like, I'm not going to sacrifice their future and lives for this cause I don't believe in. And so it was like that was kind of my moment, I suppose, where I was like, it was like a maternal instinct that just took over, um, which
Very
is very,
common. Then I
mm,
listen to people's stories. It's like when you start realizing you have this child that's completely dependent on you, and it is, I believe it's a maternal instinct or a paternal
mm.
instinct that kicks in that says, I gotta get out.
And I think over the years, whenever a new revelation or whatever would come out from David Berg, a lot of people would leave. And I think it was probably because of that, when it was about, sexually abusing kids, when it was about, which was the law of love, that you can do anything as long as it's
Mm.
in loving. And and hookers for Christ, like you said, sending the women out, and people would leave during those. So it's not like everyone just accepted it. Like a lot of people with a brain or with maternal instincts or something would leave. Um, so it's kind of heartbreaking that your own mum couldn't do that for you. It's a heartbreaking and it's a sad thing
Sure.
that you have to let go of. But I'm just grateful at that time I had the wherewithal to just say, I had a little bit of money, I had a strong maternal instinct, to get out. And fortunately, I wasn't disabled, I was intelligent, I had all of those things and very, very driven. So I'm not judging anyone else that didn't, wasn't able to do that, because I know what it feels like. And, I've dealt with a lot of moral injury myself around my son's
Mm.
disability. But I was just like a woman possessed after that. I was like
Mm-hmm.
out door to door selling cookies. We learned how to make money, at least like
Right.
fundraise. I mean, I was just out with a brand new baby after hemorrhaging really badly, and it was just crazy. The experiences that I had to go through. So I'd like get call center jobs and just anything I could. And I actually relate more to stories like Maid. I don't know if you've seen Maid, but it was like a
No.
top selling book, and she was in sort of in a domestic violence relationship, and so stories like of just having absolutely nothing and having how hard it is to kind of fight your way out of that.
Hmm.
So those stories kind of I relate more to than some of the cult literature, which was
Yeah.
about going in and coming out, having a loving family, um, and getting a Netflix special, which is not how it is for those of us who grow up in it.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, it took several years of me getting on my feet and having a lot of horrible jobs and sales, and trying to raise these two kids, both of them with challenges. And then I ended up just deciding one day that I was going to go to university, and I just said, "That's it. I'm just going to do it." It's like it's split-second decision. I'm not going to live like this. I want to get out of the sort of under the poverty line.
So you
um,
literally didn't have any friends or family on the outside to help you. You were really doing this on your own, sounds
Well,
like.
I fortunately I have some amazing siblings, but they were all in their own, struggles and trying to make a life for
Sure.
themselves. So we certainly didn't, give each other money or places to stay or supports like that because we just didn't have it. We were all just,
Right.
have had our kids and our challenges. Um, but I'm fortunate that I am in Australia as well. So I think that's a big thing. There's a lot of different factors to how successful people are after they leave. So we don't have to pay for our education up front. It goes onto a HEX debt. We can pay for it when we're making over $60,000, $70,000 a year. So there's a lot
Hmm.
of benefits. I think
Yeah.
in the US it's a lot harder because it's just not the same systems and
Yeah.
services. I mean, all of this I didn't know. I'd never had a day of formal education in my life. So 28 years old, walking into university for the first time, my first day of schooling. Um,
That is
so
amazing.
yeah,
That is truly amazing.
I know. So I did a stat test, and so I mean, it was my own therapy, really, in the sense of it was psychoeducation for me. And learning about some of these different things like asks, the conformity
Ash
research.
conformity study.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like if everyone else is saying something a wrong answer, you're likely to say it too, just because it feels so awkward to be
Right.
the only one out. And then Milgram's obedience to authority.
Yep.
That basically changed my life. That story, I get chills, just talking about
I
some of
use
this.
both all the time, and Zimbardo Prison Study. Those are the three that
Mm,
I teach all the time as the foundation for understanding mind control and
hmm
the bite model.
And yeah, it was just so amazing for me, and to be able to just actually soak all this in, and okay, this is why this happened. 65+% of people will literally give someone a lethal electric shock just because an authority figure tells them to. Like, it's shocking. It's so like literally shocking.
We're
um
wired to conform to and follow leaders we think are legitimate. And we had the higher purpose for science. We had committed to do this experiment for science.
For
So,
sure.
yeah,
And if he was wearing a white lab coat, they're more
right.
likely to, like, there's a lot of things as well, because we think of, of that. So it's interesting. And then even the ones like the bystander effect and how so many people will
Sure.
stand by and see horrific things happening. So going through that experience was really good to deconstruct. And I remember I didn't know anything about cult literature. It's only been the last few years that I've sort of looked into it a bit more.
It's
But
amazing to me.
yeah,
You're
well,
amazing.
Thank you.
Really?
But I think I just, and even when I went through like a critical thinking course, and I just was like, I literally remember crying and sobbing that I could finally ask questions and I actually finally knew how to find answers. Like, because my whole life, it's like whenever you asked a question, wrap it up in a bundle of faith, or
Yeah.
all things work together for good for God. They're just
Yeah.
these thought terminating cliches
Yep.
to stop us
Exactly.
from asking questions. It's like, well, not all things work together for good. My dad died because he followed
Right.
a faulty doctorate. Um, so I think critical thinking is so important. Like, how do you know someone's actually, and it's not like all science is perfect. There's definitely bias in science, as we know, as we see, with some of this coming out. But it's like, well, how can you find out? How can you read a journal article and say this is good, this is crap? They can actually say something about this, but they can't actually talk about that because they're not talking about that population. And what does it look like? Double blind studies and all the different biases, and it was
Right.
just so helpful for me. And so I
So
think
28, no formal education, get into university. Did you know you wanted to become a psychologist? How did that evolve? Or were you just trying to answer questions for yourself and figure out how to make a living for your children?
it was really, my motivation was definitely my sons. And I just wanted to understand how to help them more. And you think psychology is counseling when you go in, and it's not. It's about research methods and statistics. That's really what it's about. And having no math background, that was bloody hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about it's about empirically driven research, how to pick something out. So psychologists really are, like yourself as well, people that have done research and understand how to determine if something's right or wrong or
Right.
false. It's so important that is taught to children, and the
Sure.
different cognitive distortions as well, and things people use. So I think I just wanted to help my kids. That was the number one, just to understand their disabilities and their support needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do it with full-time work. Like the year I did my dissertation, full-time work, full-time study, raising two kids with special needs. Like I was crazy by
And,
the end
and
of it.
and you were not married? You didn't have a husband to
I
help
was
support
married,
you?
yeah, and that's
Oh,
another big point. I don't talk much about him just because it's his story to tell, and I don't like saying the wrong
mm,
thing because. But that's another factor I think that led to my success and being able to get through that, is having that support from him, which I'm really grateful for.
great.
But still, it's hard to live on one income. You still
Sure.
yeah. So with the needs that our kids had as well. So that kind of led me on to that. And I worked in disability and not-for-profit organizations for many years. So my dissertation was actually about social identity theory. And it was about how to create a sense of organizational attachment, or a sense of psychological attachment to the organizations that you work with.
Mm,
Um, so in social identity theory, it's basically we all want to feel good about ourselves. And part of our self-esteem is the organizations or the groups that we're a part of, right?
right.
So we're not going to be a part of a group if we think it's garbage, or if we think it's there's something wrong with it. So that's why if you have a perception that that group is very prestigious, if you have a perception that the group is distinctive, so it's different than other groups, and then also that there's competition with the outside world, like us versus them, then you
Mm,
have a higher attachment to that organization.
sure.
And there's some individual factors as well, like your need for identification or your need to be a part of the collective.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different factors for different individuals. Some people don't have that need as much, they're more individualistic. So So my thesis was on not-for-profit workers, because you need not-for-profit workers to actually do a lot above and beyond their role, to work for a lot less money than they might in a corporate organization. And then also the lower intention to quit, lower your absenteeism, and actually your psychological well-being is better when you actually feel an attachment to the organization. And I think where
Sure.
cults get it wrong is it goes too far in that spectrum, where that organization becomes your entire life.
Well, they
So,
want to take over your identity. They don't want you to
mm,
be yourself or make your own decisions. So it's very, very different. And as you know, I have an influence continuum. So I talk
mm,
about there are cults, but they're healthy cults. They're groups, cohesive
mm,
groups that have purpose, they have a leader, but you have informed consent and you can ask questions and you can leave if you don't like it anymore and people still like you and want to talk to you. Like really qualitatively different
mm.
experiences.
For sure. So I think that's the main thing. I think it's important to have a lot of different groups you're a part of as well, not one group that consumes your whole life. And so you should be finding groups that you have a sense of identity with, and a sense of shared values, and because like the way we act in our groups, you know, that says more about us than our actual individual. I think that's where sometimes we get it wrong a little bit, is that we assume we have some authentic identity, but really our identity a lot of times is molded and shaped by the people we're around and the groups we're in. So it's more about finding the right ones, the right company that shares your values, the right groups that you're going to be around, so you can
Yeah.
be
I would say
authentic in that
we
sense.
have a self, but the group is an extension of ourself. So, but as we were talking before we started recording, a lot of people come out of an authoritarian cult and they just had been so traumatized they don't want to get involved even with a relationship, much less a group, because
Mm,
they just don't trust. They've been so
that's so true.
traumatized.
Absolutely. And I think we see that really high numbers in the second generation as well. Um, so in some of the work that I've been doing lately, it's only in the last few years that I mean, I've worked in disability for a long time, and I started my own business in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
COVID was amazing for our business, maybe not great for other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so we work in the field of positive behavior support, like you were saying at the beginning, so with people with disabilities.
Yeah, I'd love
Um,
for you to talk more about that as well, if that's what you're going
yeah,
for. Yeah,
for sure. But the point I was just making before is that I've been working in that field and haven't really wanted to sort of talk about the past, but I work with a lot of people who are institutionalized and indigenous, and people that have had a lot of discrimination in their lives,
sure.
and mental illness as well. But I had sort of ignored, one of the probably hardest done by communities like the second generation of cults, and people who are born and raised in high control and high demand groups, who missed
Yes.
out on everything that you'd expect as an Australian, or a Canadian citizen as well, and and education and healthcare and welfare and a family, and you know
Mm,
uh, all of those things that we missed out on. And so that's why there was this real drive for me to be able to see what I could do to help our community as well. Um, so, so I'll tell you
yeah,
just a
it's
tiny bit about the work that I do, and I'll lead
please.
into the work that I'm doing now with the second gen.
Awesome.
Yes. So, in our work, like I said, we work with people who have been institutionalized in a disability field. So, our work is really about human rights, first and foremost. So that works really well for me.
Yeah.
Um, and it's about, going into organizations, and usually with people who have behavioral concerns. So a lot of times they're maybe hurting themselves or other people. They're at risk, and and it's our job. And I've got an amazing company. I work with the most beautiful practitioners with a range of different qualifications, sometimes some way more qualified than me.
Mm.
um, and so we go in and we try to find the function of the behavior. So why is this person acting out? Rather than just punishing the behavior, which is what has been done in the past, even
Mm.
in our sort of societies. A lot of times we think, oh, if someone's acting a certain way, we have to put them in jail, we have to punish them, we have to
Right.
take their iPad off them, put them in their room, you know, seclude them. And that was the way I grew up. It was just like punishment, 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 demerit, spanking, you know. So I can spot it right away. And then also coercive control, of course, which is
Right.
they call it a psychosocial restraint. So a lot of these organizations are using restraints like chemical restraints, maybe medicating people, sedating them,
Mm.
and mechanical and seclusion and different types of restraints. So our job really as practitioners and behavior therapists and psychologists is to really uphold the human rights, to give a voice to people with the disabilities, to actually try to explain what it is that they're trying to communicate um, with their behaviors of concern. Because
Right.
sometimes the only thing they have is behavior. They might
Right.
be nonverbal and not even be able to communicate. So it works really well because I feel like I can understand it so well because that's the way I grew up, that with constant restrictions and restraints
Yeah.
and seclusion is like one that you can almost never get an authorization for. So you actually have to go through a process of authorization. You have to make a really good argument of why that needs to be put in
Mm.
place, a restrictive intervention. It
Mm-hmm.
also has to be for the shortest time,
Mm-hmm.
and to the risk of harm. And there's a lot of factors. So, but the way we grew up, we were always like secluded when we did something wrong and put in a room. But if you think about jail, like that's the worst punishment you can get.
Yeah.
It was just so
And
common for us.
isolation in jail is even
Isolation, yeah.
worse.
And and it's something that absolutely is not done in the disability community. It's very, very rare that they'll actually authorize that, but it's done in cults all the time. Like,
Yeah.
why is there all these rules to protect people, except for cult people in these high control groups? So
It's a good
yeah.
question. Why did I do my doctorate to update the law so we would have a framework that we could actually say, you want religious freedom, but your religion lies when they recruit and they take away people's human rights. You shouldn't
Mhm.
be have religious freedom status with tax exemption if you're doing that, and your leaders should be held accountable. That's what I'm after in these latter years of my
Absolutely. And
career.
I think we need like an actual assessment, like a psychological assessment or a screener or something where people can see how harmful that group is. I know there's a few different ones out there, but I think we
And
need a
my bite
more
model
extensive
is
one.
getting ramped up to do massive data collection for people who
Amazing.
want to fill it out, because now it's like a scientifically validated construct for authoritarian control. So
Hmm.
anyway,
So can
continue,
you?
please.
Yeah, no, I use it all the time. I've told you that before. So in the institutions, or like they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be homes and supported living homes and communities and everything with people with disabilities. They are kind of they are there. They're like um, so it is, you can't just shut all these places down there, and a lot of times the staff are institutionalized as well. So it is good to have a model like that where they can actually, okay, well, how much control do you have over this person's life? Can you like tick it
Right,
off and let's see
right,
how harmful it is.
right.
And sometimes you do, with people with severe mental illness. I've worked in the mental health system as well. and had to put people on involuntary treatment orders. So sometimes you do have to take people's rights away, but it has to be always, for the risk of harm and their best interest, the least restrictive for the shortest amount of time.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of rules there to protect
Yep.
vulnerable people. So yes, so I've been running my business for I think 6 years now, and it's absolutely I just absolutely love it, because I have been in the coercive sort of government organizations where it was like, take your meds or we'll send out the police, apply for these jobs
Right.
or we'll take away your meds. So it's just punishment, punishment, punishment. So
Maria,
positive
where
behavior.
is your organization based in Australia?
We're in Queensland.
Queensland. Okay. So Brisbane or around there?
Yeah, so partly Brisbane, but Gold Coast, we go all the way out to Toowoomba, which is and then up to the Sunshine Coast. So
Great.
so I haven't moved interstate yet because there's just so much work to do. I keep having to get more people to join the team.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
yes,
train them
so
up. Yeah.
mm, so we found that you basically need to always just use reinforcement and never use punishment, because
Mm-hmm.
punishment, there's a coercive element to it, but always looking at the person's quality of life. So whenever there's a behavior of concern, the more the quality of life increases, their behaviors, become irrelevant, because they're just basically trying to meet an unmet need. So I think it's important to think about that in cults as well, and people who are in groups that are harmful for them or other people. What need are they actually getting met by that?
Mm.
And our job is actually to put in a functionally equivalent behavior to support them to get their needs and to make their environment amazing, and the connections with the people that they work with, and all these extra activities and relationships. And so that's our job. It's that full picture, the bird's eye view, rather than just thinking about that behavior and trying to stop the behavior.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And just trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and experience what they're experiencing and kind of figure out from the inside out what do they need.
mm,
And I just love your model. So I know we've talked about a number of them, but you have a number more, which we can add to the blog and flesh
mhm.
it out, as well as a link to your video too. But what else would you like to say and bring it back home to people born in cults and survivors?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, during this kind of period, the COVID, I think there was lockdown for a lot of people. It was quite traumatizing for those of us that experienced institutional sort of abuse,
Mm-hmm.
um, and all the controls, and there's a lot of fear still. I think those of us that grew up, about vaccines, and I think sometimes the government comes in and they become culty, they become controlling, and they tell people what they need to do without actually thinking, how can they give this information, appropriately, and support people to not be afraid, rather than just mandating something, or terrifying people into submission. So we were seeing a lot of suicides, and a lot of people who've passed away. I mean, I can look at pictures from my childhood and see like 5 or 6 people that are no longer here
Mm-hmm.
anymore, and it's just horrifying. So that's where I really started saying, well, what are the numbers? you know, what supports do we actually need? Why is there this epidemic? And so in February this year, I started doing some media, and to try to get the people to start thinking about it, because there's also, like you said, there's some of these different cult groups. There was a big shooting,
Yeah.
there's one, the Struts trial, Elizabeth Strutt, where she's basically, like you said, she was given her medication. Um, and seeing that, just like, these things are just happening and no one's talking about it because there's so much shame, and we're living in secrecy, those of us that have gotten out, But you said this to me at ICSA, you're the white blood cells. You know, those of us that have been in this, authoritarianism and this fear and anxiety and extremism and paranoia, all of that. We've experienced it firsthand and how harmful it is, and we can spot it a million miles away. And the world is becoming more and more like that, just normally, like the standard population, you know.
Yeah, the world's
So,
becoming more authoritarian and more cults everywhere, and I really do believe we can function like the immune system of our body saying, "Danger, danger." Let's go after that bad cell because it's going to harm, this
mm,
country or this population of people. And I really do believe that former members have something so precious to share because we know what it's like to lose our freedom or not
mm.
to have a freedom.
And we are obligated, and I understand some people are not in that position and they're very traumatized and they're just trying to get through their day. And there's no judgment there. But I think those of us who have the knowledge, the qualifications and training, and that we're in a position that we can speak up, that I think it is important that we do. And psychologists, that's part of our ethics,
Right.
that if we see human rights violations and things that are not right, it's our job to speak up about them. So my hope of going out, coming out, I call it, and talking a bit more about it is to, like you said, prevent the suffering in the first place. So you're saying, hey, this is what to look out for. These are the red flags. Don't give up your freedom, your sovereignty to someone else. Maybe it sounds like they're doing it for you, but you're actually doing it for them. Like
Right.
you're taking on their paranoia and their fears and their anger, and you're actually just becoming that deployable agent for them, and it's going to cause suffering in yourself and your children and generations to come. So I think
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
just so important that they do it as a preventative measure, but then also to share um, those experiences that we've had as well, to get more support and less stigma for people who've come out.
But I'm going
Yeah.
to add another thing to your plate and say that you need to train more psychologists and therapists to even identify that the person is coming in has a mind control cult background and what specialized treatment they're going to need. That's the people are not educated in grad school about this problem. Maybe they learned about addiction, maybe they're being taught about disabilities, but about cults and undue influence,
Mm.
not happening yet.
It's very true. And I've actually on like psychology pages for peer, I've put it out there, like we've got Julie Jenkinson coming. I've got opportunities to train people, but no one is interested. Like we get like a very small handful. And we are all trained in social psychology.
Mm,
We're all trained in what happens in groups. But there's a lot of people saying, we all need social connection. Like in every TED talk, the end of it is connection, social
right,
community. But no one says how to have a safe community that keeps
right.
people safe.
Well,
So that's where the problem is. It's like, well, what's good? We talk about individual relationships and abuse and the cycle of violence. And in the 1st of July, I think this year, we've got an trafficking organization now, and we've got coercive control laws, but it's mostly
mhm.
in intimate partner violence. But people aren't talking about how groups and communities and workplaces, when there's groupthink and authoritarianism, and they're super harmful, and we have to talk more about
We
that.
are now. I
We
hope
are,
people
we
are
are.
listening. Let's share it. I mean, I literally did an online course because how can we scale helping the millions of people who've been radicalized online by cults or
Mm,
radicalized from being born into a cult. How can we train up mental health professionals? And what I say, and it gets their attention, I say, we were taught it was unethical to work with somebody with a problem that we weren't trained for
mm,
or supervised on. And you're not even asking the question to know that the person did come from a mind control cult. So you're really an unethical, dimensions there. And
mm.
and
Definitely. And I think I've had six odd psychologists over the years, and I think there's only been two that where we've even broached the subject.
yeah,
So it's very, very rare that because people will just think of it as a one-on-one, like domestic violence relationship. They have a hard time thinking about a whole group of people. I think it's because we're such an individualistic society. So to
hmm.
think that a whole group of people could be in on it, you know,
Yeah.
on the
So I have a
abuse.
colleague in Melbourne, Australia, Nigel Denning, a
Mhm.
psychologist who knows about cults and has worked with cults. So I want to introduce the two of you because people need to know each other and network and figure out how we can amplify, maybe get some government grants or some private grants
Mm,
to help. Just touch
so
on the
true.
ACEs study with
Mm,
Children of God, because there's a lot of we can add a
for sure.
PowerPoint to the blog on
Hmm.
that.
So we were invited to speak at ICSA as well, where I met you,
Yeah.
and so myself and Whisper and Jemima from Butterflies and Bravery podcast. So they started a second generation podcast for all
Mm-hmm.
cult survivors. Um, and Joe, who's a friend of mine here and a business owner, the four of us, decided to get together and really talk about the experiences of those of us who are born and raised, which are very different than, some of the challenges that people joined and got out, experience. And so, people, I also have a support group. The Australian government has actually put the Children of God or Family International onto the redress scheme, which
Good.
is actually a scheme where to support people who have experienced sexual abuse in institutions. So
Yeah.
it's usually like Catholic institution or something like that, a disability service. So they've actually put our cult in that, which is
Good.
very amazing. So that's
Yeah.
you can claim up to $150,000 of a payment, but you also get free psychology and you get for life, I think, and
Yeah.
you get
That's
free,
awesome. I
which
think
is
the Jehovah's
amazing.
Witnesses were, because I know the Australian government looked into the JWs and their pedophilia
Mm.
thing.
There
So I
was
think,
1,800 cases
yeah.
of child sexual abuse that were not reported. Like that
Mm,
is unbelievable.
yeah.
So it's not just us, it's really it's a lot of people. And I've got a friend from the two by twos, the Cooneites, and the same, abuses and the exclusive brethren. And I'm not calling these cults. I'm very
I
poor. I
am.
can't be I
I
can't be
am.
taken to court.
No.
But
They
yeah,
have
but
all
I
the
mean,
characteristics of a destructive cult. That's the ethical way to say it. I can't
yes.
sue
Well,
you for.
I can't speak to it, but I've got friends from it, and all I could speak to is their experiences and the shunning and the
Right.
suffering and the high levels of abuse and the organization caring a lot more about their reputation and hiding things rather than the victims and the people who've been
Yeah.
really harmed.
And if I
So,
may
mhm,
say, Maria, if you don't mind, I'll just say, because you reminded me, Joe spoke, and it was so amazing to hear a man who was raised in this cult talk about what it's like, his feelings and such. It was so moving, and he's so courageous. I just want to say
mm.
that because it's very rare for
It's very rare, and there's almost no males that have written books. And he did leave under 12, so that could be a reason why. So maybe he didn't feel as like he had much to do with the perpetration, but he did talk about the incredible amount of shame, like lifelong shame that he has And I think sometimes people, they think, oh, women and children are abused in cults, and men get to be horrible and do whatever they want and have sex with anyone and not raise their kids, and patriarchy and all that stuff. But and yes, it is true in a regards. But a man like having their children taken away from them, a man being told to perpetrate on people,
Yeah.
the moral injury that comes with that, when that's completely against, maybe it works for people who are actual psychopaths and like to hurt
Yeah.
people, but for normal people with consciences and morals, like it's incredibly painful, and there's a lot
Yes.
of suffering that comes from it as well, of being put into that role.
Yes.
And I've have it in my own family and loved ones, and it's just, and I think we've got to talk about that too, that they were also victims,
Yeah.
and
Victim
the amount,
victimizers. Yeah,
for sure.
definitely.
And so I think that's why we roped Joe into coming, because we needed a male voice. And
Well,
I'd been to this SGA group before with Magdalene, I think,
mm,
and all us women were talking about all our challenges, and there was a bunch of men sitting in the back, and they didn't say a peep.
mm,
And so it was quite, sad for me that there's still all this shame, and probably like the finger pointing and the kind of gender feminists or whatever that are it takes away these nuanced stories, and it takes away from actually making change and
yeah.
supporting people. So I think it was amazing to have his voice, and he has written a little bit about his story as well, I think, on
Yeah,
Medium.
he touched me. I mean, not that everyone's story didn't touch me, and the adverse childhood experiences were
Mm.
off the charts of
Yeah, so
abuse.
we've 81% of us experience physical abuse, 81 emotional, sexual abuse was 77.6. Like those are just crazy numbers. Neglect, like the medical neglect, 65%, emotional, household dysfunction. The numbers are just insane. And
Mm-hmm.
72% divorce. So the average is like 7, and over 67% of us have over 6. So that's according to the research, a reduction of lifespan of 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's just it's, and that's without intervention. I'll say there is
Right.
hope, with
Right.
intervention. And you introduced me to Dr. Folletti and his team, which I'm really grateful for. So we're trying to work on a project there.
Great. I would
um,
love to see that because you need it. We need it, and we need to also connect the dots with organized cult childhood
For
abuse.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
like this is a cautionary tale as well. So people realize you can't just live out in a little community without any medical care and disability, and no child safety organizations, and no regulation, and just think it's going to be all, utopia. Like
Right.
horrible things are happening in these communities, without the checks and balances. So 63% of us with mental illness, 28.9% with chronic health conditions, and that's a really big thing, like
Somatizing.
IBS, and yeah, and like I was saying that I went to the dentist and they said I don't have saliva in my mouth. It's like being in fight and flight for so
Yes.
long. Even though I've had a ton of therapy and support systems in place. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of us have serious, sexual health issues, physical health issues. We've lost a few people that are my age to cancer and strokes, and
Mm,
there's a lot that's going on in our community. And suicide ideations just off the charts. Addictions is like 40+%, and disability, like lifelong disabilities from people that didn't get medical attention,
right.
um, as well. And our kids are being born with disabilities, like 70+%.
Mm,
And a lot of us wouldn't have even had the capacity to go and get those diagnostic assessments, and wouldn't have
right.
the funds to do that. So I bet those numbers are much higher. And the people that I know, like I know several people in my own family, like under 30, under 40, who, you know, like they need severe intervention if they're going to even
Yeah.
make it to 40, you
Yeah.
know, with serious physical and mental health and substance issues, but also going into domestic violence relationships. Like we were actually groomed for that. So
Yes.
50% of us have gone into domestic violence relationships.
Hmm.
It's just
Because it's
crazy, like the
familiar.
numbers.
You know,
Mm.
the patterns are familiar, and you don't know how to say no because you've been told that everything's divine, and or you brought it off on yourself. Maria, you are an inspiration. I am so glad that we got to meet, and thank you for agreeing to do this talk with me. And I hope that we can do work together, even though I'm up here. I want to come down and visit and teach and share. And any last words are yours.
Oh, I definitely want to end on a positive note. Just
Okay.
about domestic violence and all these horrible things. But we have a support group here locally, and I think in person is a lot nicer, but we've definitely got some online as well. So Whisper and Jemima work with the Lawlitch Center, and they've got some for second gen. We
Hmm.
find that it actually helps, you know, to not have, you know, the both generations in the same one, just because
Right.
sometimes there's a lot of angst and suffering, and you know, we need to kind of think about this as a truth and reconciliation thing, like
Yeah.
apartheid, because a lot of times people did things under the influence that are completely outside of their character, even our
Right.
parents.
Right.
And so they need to take responsibility, and they need to start reconciliating with us and saying, you know,
Hmm.
this is not a good way to grow up. We still have a lot saying we just had a normal Christian upbringing,
Right.
which is so false.
Right.
Um, and uh, and so many of them are like passing away now without being able to reconcile. So I think that's what we need. We need honesty, accountability, and we need community as well. So those of us that have this amazing support group, I've seen people get out of domestic violence relationships, give up
Great.
addictions. We just have dinner together once a month, and we connect with each other, and sometimes even
Great.
just do silly things, but talk about hard subjects as well. And I think these support groups are so important.
Totally.
And there has to be boundaries in them. It has to be run by someone with some mental health background
Sure.
and knowledge. But I think there is a lot that we can do. Like, it's not hopeless. There's a lot we can do to share our stories, to educate, to support each other, and to kind of change the trajectory really of the
Yeah.
future. Yeah.
Yep. So that's pretty positive, and you are an inspiration and a role model. So thank you for being you and all the good work that you do. And
Thank you so much, Steve.
keep take care of yourself too. I like that you have fun and do giggly things and do other enjoyable things. You have to keep sane in this
Yes.
work.
Keep sane. I love that.
Yeah. So thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Steve Hassan here. You know, it's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.